Hello and welcome to Leaders Unplugged, where leaders connect on what makes them tick, how they view leadership within their teams, and how they have evolved into their positions. Join us now as we uncover the secrets to effective leadership and learn from the experiences of accomplished leaders. With your hosts, Kate, David, and Marc, we're ready to go unplugged with the leaders you love.
Well, thank you very much, Jim, for taking the time to meet with me today. It's always a pleasure to get to speak to you. One of the reasons why we wanted to chat with you and include you in this is you've been a leader in so many different areas of your life, from the private sector in through academia and being the dean of the Haskayne School of Business. And really interestingly, your name is the room that's named after you is the one that our class is in. So I got a good, I found it to be really interesting that that was the case for our leadership class, and I couldn't think of a more fitting name for the room. So, what are some of the most interesting lessons that you've learned about leadership throughout that time?
Wow, that's a big question. I guess the number one thing, Marc, and I'm sure you know this, it's all about people. When I started my journey in consulting engineering, I was under the impression that the smartest person in the room is what you want to be. And the more intelligent you are, the further you're going to go. And it was actually through my MBA that I learned that, no, it's much more complex than that one person can never be the path to all answers. And you need to find ways to engage people and to get them involved in understanding the problems and finding the right solutions. And I can actually capture it all in a philosophy by a guy named Max Dupree, who wrote a book which I love called Leadership is an Art. It's like a 1990s book or something like that. And Marc, he had this philosophy of, well, here's how he put it is, you work at Stantec, but if you were unhappy, you could go across the street to another engineering firm or to another, another venture capital firm. So you can get a job at one of, almost infinite number of places. So really, when the company says they pay you to do something, well, that's not really true because you can get that money at lots of different places. You actually volunteer to go to that firm. So as a leader, and you can think about this in terms of the people who are working for you, you have to treat them like volunteers because they volunteer to work for you. They could volunteer to work for somebody else. And I think that whole philosophy really captures how you can be effective in leadership if you're working with people, treat them like volunteers. And in fact, you can turn that around if you're getting abused by people who are working for you. Say, look, you need to treat me like a volunteer too. I don't have to stay here. It really changes the dynamic as opposed to do this because you get paid to do it. Mm-hmm. That just isn't a concept that works well with people, especially if you want them to be creative and come up with their own ideas.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really interesting. That timing is also really fascinating from a perspective of something that is happening at work right now with me. So I always appreciate your insights and thoughts, and I'll be writing that one down in the notebook that I have of some of Harold's quotes. So thank you, Jim.
As long as you're not planning on quitting your job now by telling your boss, "Hey, I'm a volunteer, I'm out of
here." No, my boss and I get along very, very well, but there's been some broader battles with the larger team that we've been going through. But nothing that hard work and time won't fix, I don't think. But one of the things that has always really struck me about you, Jim, is your ethics and being such an ethical leader. It would be very interesting to hear your thoughts on that, because that's always, when you talk to people in the industry, you always find it really interesting what somebody says about you first. And ethics is always something that comes up about you, Jim. And I did some digging as well before this interview. So, but I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on how you lead as an ethical leader.
Well, honestly, Mark, I'm really touched to hear that. It is, and honestly, I would say that I don't even understand why somebody wouldn't be ethical, because A, it works, and B, it makes it so much easier to look in the mirror afterwards and to look at your children and think about what you've done. And so it's just, I don't even understand why. And, you see it in politics, and we're looking at the US election, like this concept of, well, just lie about it. I don't even get that. I don't understand it at all. So that's maybe not a very fulsome answer for you. But yeah, for me, I guess it's part of my makeup, how I was brought up, my parents and how they felt. But generally, I look across the board and I just don't understand why people wouldn't want to be ethical. You just can't win by cutting corners.
Agreed. It's a very, very strange thing, and it almost appears that has been amplified in the last few years. And I don't know if it's a condition of society, the advent of social media, but it's just it seems to be far more in our face than it ever was. Poor ethics seemed to be more covert back in even 10, 15 years ago. Now it seems to be relatively overt. It's a very challenging problem that I think is going to be very, very difficult to overcome and fix. I'm hopeful that the pendulum's going to swing back, but only time will tell with that.
As you're talking about it, Mark, it causes me to wonder, like, what's the driver? And it might be how people set goals for themselves. Mm-hmm. So if it's just purely winning, like having, the most money, the most number of planes, whatever it is, yeah, then I guess people will do unethical things to get there. But I think it's important not only for leaders, but for everybody to think about, what do you really want to accomplish? What's really important to you in life? And probably come to terms with that before somebody starts getting into these situations where they might make an unethical decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, setting that North Star of that and holding true to it is something I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I don't know, I might be veering off, but it was part of my leadership journey when I was at Hopewell, and particularly we were doing well, and one of our partners was Rob Peters of Peters & Co., and spent a lot of time with him, and through him got to meet a lot of very wealthy people in town. And I started watching, what their concerns were. And at that time, it was that their kids would get kidnapped, or, that they would have 7 houses around the world or whatever. And it just totally turned me off. It just felt like they just have a whole different set of headaches. Like, they've got to find a way to make, $250,000 a month just to keep up their lifestyle. And so that really impacted me in terms of saying that this is not a game I'm going to play anymore. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Where's the goal? Where are you really going? How does it improve your life? Mm-hmm. I don't think people reflect on those things enough.
Yeah, so Jim, looking back on your career and having led both in the public sector and private sector, were there any difference in your leadership style between the two?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure if it is because of the setting or just because of my growth, my personal growth. And I got to think about it, because I came to a point, certainly the thing about an academic unit like Haskayne, it's very different because faculty, it's actually unionized. Mm-hmm. And so I'm the only person who's outside of the union. So 100 faculty members report to me. Mm-hmm. They are very independent. They have academic freedom. They have tenure, and you can't get rid of them. So if they don't like what you're doing, they just say, yeah, whatever, I don't care. Mm-hmm. So you have to use a lot of suasion and positive reinforcement to get people on side. And Marc, what I learned through that was the most effective path to be a good leader in that is to actually say yes almost all the time. So I would encourage people to have ideas, initiatives, what they wanted to do, how they saw that they could make a bigger contribution, and always try and say, yes, let's do it. With the caveat, you've got to find money. You got to get a grant. You've got to get collaborators to work with you. I'm going to support you. But I'm never going to say that's a bad idea unless it's a really bad idea. But usually they aren't. Mm-hmm. They might be more challenging. I'll help you with it, and I'll connect whoever I can. But the answer is yes. That's what you want to do. Let's do it. And I started thinking about it over the last 5 years. And honestly, I think that approach can work in almost any setting. If you think about, as a leader, how can I help this person fulfill their dream where they feel they can contribute most to the organization? It's a different approach.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. One thing that is really, I think would be really interesting to hear from your perspective is you were very transformative in changing the Haskayne School of Business from the implementation of the Creative Destruction Lab to the building and construction of the new building, Matheson Hall, as well as revamping the program. How did you do it? What leadership principles and tools were you utilizing to accomplish that? Because they cover so many different facets. It's not a singular lane, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, thanks, Marc. Everything is done in teams, and I try as much as possible not to be the lead on projects, but to find champions to really support them. And bring as much political capital, financial capital as I can for their projects. So, very early on, whether it was Leadership Center or Creative Destruction Lab, really tried to get somebody senior in the organization excited about it so that I can back them. And I was going to be lead guy. I guess the building was probably a little different because nobody in an academic unit has expertise in doing buildings. But really made sure that it was a full group that was involved in designing the classrooms and figuring out how to flow and everything. Lots of committees. I know people hate that, but gosh, you got to involve people. That's really the bottom line. And they have to feel that they're really making decisions and contributing. And that's how things move.
And on one final closing note, if you could say one thing about leadership that you could put on a billboard for everybody to read, what would it be?
Well, volunteerism is a big one. The always try to say yes is a big one. And I'll give you sort of the third leg, I think, is you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And when somebody's being unreasonable to you or what you perceive as unreasonable, they have a good reason for it. So it's no longer on them. You've got to figure out what that is. You've got to try and get into their situation, into their challenge, and understand it. It's not good enough just to say, judging is bad. Understanding is good. How's that?
That's really good. And Jim, the timing of this conversation is incredibly helpful for a few things that I'm going through with work. So I always appreciate our conversations and getting to learn from you. So thank you very much. I really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, I'm glad we had a reason to connect again, because I always enjoy our conversations too.
Thanks so much for joining me, Brooke.
Yes, happy to be here.
Good. All right. So Brooke started off as a driver with Four Seasons Transportation Company, and she's now CEO. You've been with Four Seasons for just about 15 years now, which is pretty incredible. Brooke is also a leader in the accessible transportation industry. She regularly speaks at national and international forums. She's always traveling the world. And in 2018, Brooke accepted the Accessible Transportation Award and Commerce Award from the City of Calgary. And in 2021, Brooke was awarded with Avenue Calgary's Top 40 Under 40. So a clear leader in the Calgary and the transportation community. And so, yeah, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Kate. That's very sweet of you. Thank you.
Let's just kick it off with some questions. So, Brooke, how would you define your leadership style?
Oh, yeah, that's evolved over time. I think, when I built Four Seasons, I built it from a perspective that I absolutely hate being an employee. I don't do well with rules. I don't want people telling me what to do, when to clock in. So I think I created an environment that I wanted to show up to work, that every day I wanted to be here. And I think my leadership style reflects that. Very anti-hierarchical system. Everyone's opinion matters. Actually, the opposite, which is like a bottom-up approach. Like, I believe that at the top of our structure is our staff. It's our students we transport, and us in leadership are, the structure support. So it's not about climbing to the top. It's rather that us that are fortunate enough to be a leader are there to support others. So I think when I built Four Seasons, I did that. I started as a driver. I still go out into the field if I need to, meet with families, and just as a reminder of what's important. So, yeah.
Wonderful. I mean, and you've been at it for 15 years, which speaks wonders in itself. So, besides just, your reputation of being in the industry for so long, how do you know if your leadership style is successful within your projects or your employees?
I mean, apart from actual measures, we hire external companies to do corporate culture things, but I think forget about all that. It's retention. I think in this industry, we have a super bad retention. Transportation can range from 35 to 40% turnover every year. And last year, in the last school calendar year, we had less than 7% turnover. So we have a really high retention rate. That speaks volumes to, I think, leadership, but not only my leadership style, but what transcends through our whole organization. I think when people feel valued and heard, especially in a business where you're, in what we do, which is accessible transportation, and everyone's out in the field and they're on their own, it can be really lonely and they don't feel like they're part of a bigger picture. No different than people working from home. You need something to tether you to make you feel like you're adding value and you have purpose. And I think for us to have a really high retention rate is a direct correlation with people feeling like they're important here and they matter and they're affecting change in the lives of so many people.
Well, it sounds like you're a really humble leader, Brooke, because I think it starts from the top and trickles down. So,
oh, you want me to get more specific? I honestly, my leadership style is like, I read this book once about leadership by wandering around, and that was years ago. My ex-business partner had told me about it, and that's actually what I do. My role now in this company, I started as a driver. I've done all the roles, poorly some, but I've done them, and much smaller scale. And now I feel like I am, what I bring value to this company would be in the culture side of things. And I just manage by wandering around, touching base with people, seeing how they're doing, always having an open door, making sure that they feel like, I'm invested in them as a human, not just in their role. And I think that's been the most beautiful thing, is like, get out of your desk, get out of your office, go see your people, see how it's going, get in the field. Stop trying to manage and lead people from a chair. That's not, in a world that's become so over automated, you can't automate human connection. You can't automate relationships and love. And I think that's what we do here. So I just get out and I get in front of people and I'm relatable. And I think that people enjoy that.
Amazing. Yeah. 7% retention or turnover. Sorry. I think that speaks for itself too. So awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of how you might have had to pivot your leadership style with either a person or a project in order to make it successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have two speeds. It's like either I'm literally managing by wandering around, or we've taken on a new contract and I'm like, it's a totally different, more of an assertive leadership style. If I get a contract go out to bid in January, I win it, say like, March, I have to execute on that in June of the next, like that following June for September or potentially an August startup. So essentially by the time I get assigned the work in June to rolling it out could be 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. And we've done it before. We've scaled up 300 people in 8 weeks, or 150 people or whatever. We just did this last year. We bought 150 more buses and had to get them deployed in 4 weeks. My leadership style definitely changes then. I'm much more hands-on. It's much more of a regular meeting. When what I do well is the chaos. I bring calmness to the chaos. I support the team much more intimately then. So I would say that's probably when I'm actually deploying a new contract or school startup, that's when I become much more hands-on. Other than that, I allow people to really just learn and ask questions and figuring it out on their own. But when I know we have a really firm deadline, and I can add value, and a little bit of structure because people can spin, I feel that's when I probably get more intimately involved, and not in telling people what to do, but just getting in there and getting it done with them. Because I think even though I didn't run it alone at this size, I still understand it makes no difference. You're still getting kids to school. If it's 5 kids or 10,000 kids, it doesn't really matter. So.
Absolutely, that makes sense. All hands on deck when it's chaos time. As a female leader, do you ever find that you have to modify your communication or leadership style with other, higher level like CEOs or leaders or decision makers based on their gender, whether they're male or female?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a male-dominated industry. Transportation is also a family business kind of industry. So I've had to break that barrier. I've also had to break the male dominant thing. There's only 2 female. I sit on a board out of the States, and there's only 2 female contractors out of 150 privately owned members in that group, and only 2 of us are female that own a business. So it's tough. I mean, I'm grateful I was raised with 3 brothers. So I think one of the skills I have is you just act like a boy. I don't talk to them like a woman, like soft and expect anything different. I'm very direct. And unfortunately, I think to be successful as a female entrepreneur, you do have to just get in there, because no one's going to make it easier for you. Nobody cares. Like, if you want to be treated like an equal, you have to act like one. And I think that I've actually used my femininity and as in a really beautiful way. I can be masculine when I need to be, and my feminine energy comes out in different ways. And I'm able to persuade and make decisions with a higher EQ than men, and become, more successful because of that. Because if you're able to balance both, it's a recipe for success for sure. But I in general, I've had a really good experience being a female in a male-dominated industry. I think it's more just, I don't allow that to even come into my mind. I just push forward.
That's amazing. And have you ever had a situation where you wanted to move forward with one of your ideas? No one else on the team was bought in, so you really had to gain that buy-in. And what was the outcome of that?
Oh, all the time. That's how I grew my business. Everyone thought I was crazy. Everyone still thinks I'm crazy, which is not, they're not wrong. Definitely being the creator, the innovator, the one who has these wild ideas. But I mean, if I would have let that stop me 14 years ago, we wouldn't have had this business. So I think it's all about the why. Like, I know with my team, it's so focused on the why. They're willing to follow you. They're willing to listen to you, but it's really when you take that sharp left turn, it's like, are they still there with you?
So it's creating that vision, having that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and clear to them. Like, it's not about telling them what to do. It's like, here's my idea. How do we get there? And let's do this together. Let's get the buy-in, because it's one of the biggest weaknesses in leaders is they get nervous to hire people for their weaknesses. They don't want to bring someone in they feel as a threat, like, oh, they're better at me than that. And I'm the opposite. I'm like, I know my weaknesses. Hire everyone what I'm not good at, and I'll do what I do well. And then when we get to those positions where I have a crazy idea, or we're going to take on a really big contract and have to deploy it in 6 weeks, which adds so much stress to everyone's plate. And then your people are like, okay, let's do this. I want to do this. That's huge. But it's because you know, people have different strengths. I allow them to add input. I allow us all to get to that place of, okay, we're going to make this decision, even with some resistance. But then they trust you. They also trust me. I've done it time and time again. And when I've made mistakes, I mean, I own that. I know we make mistakes. I just try to make them smaller than I once did.
Absolutely. So really defining that vision, understanding
Yeah.
people's strengths, understanding weaknesses, and
Absolutely.
accepting when you
Challenges, or whatever you want to call it. Definitely defining the vision, defining the why this matters, defining how it impacts them. You know, talking about the challenges, ask them, like, how does this feel for you? How is this sitting for you? Like, what are you worried about? Like, you know, maybe it's less time with their family. So I think for me, yeah, that's really important. And then I feel like you get those buy-in and you just gain trust by having, it's not always going to go well, but when it doesn't go well, it's what do we do then? You know, bring them in closer, have the conversations, rebuild, and move forward again.
I love that. Amazing. All right, one last question for you. What does ethical leadership mean to you, and how important is it to how you operate in your day-to-day?
This is a great question, because I think ethical leadership is not something that people talk about very often. But for me, it's like, I mean, no different when you're a little kid. It's like, how do I lead when no one's watching? What would I do if no one knew? And this business is built on such a purpose-driven business, and the only way you can operate that is by being fully transparent, open, and honest. And my motivator, I remember my father said to me, he's like, Brooke, you can't chase the money. Be the best at what you do, and money will follow. And I think that has been what I've been focused on this whole time, is how do I do the best by these people? How do I make sure that I can feel good about it, that they're making a strong wage, that these kids are being transported well, that our kids are being taken care of, we're the best in class company. And I can go to bed at night, because it's tough. It's lonely at the top. It's lonely in leadership. There's a lot of nights where you lose sleep. You know, you have to make payroll and you have no money. In the beginning, that was tough, obviously. And just like growing pains. But I know that I'm doing the best I can by my people. And I also know that in a crisis, and when things go really bad, because when things go bad in this world, you're dealing with children's lives, it can get really bad. I can stand behind every one of my staff and know that they did the best that they could. And because of that, that's because of, you know, us in the leadership roles do the same thing. So I think the companies that do well run their business with integrity and transparency and honesty. And those that don't do well and are there just to make money and grow big, that eventually catches up to you. You know, sort of in the taxes, right? You're gonna have to pay for your poor decisions. So.
Absolutely. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Brooke. You're a wealth of knowledge when it comes to leadership. I know that you're a leader within your business industry, and then also being a mom of 3. So yeah, you have a lot on your plate, and what you juggle is phenomenal and amazing. And yeah, just so appreciative of your time and to be able to learn from you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Well, without draining his LinkedIn too much, Adam has been a leader in the commercial real estate sector in Calgary for almost a decade. He's done everything from larger commercial moves and contract negotiations to smaller transactions, all the while even being regularly cited as a source on media outlets for intel in the industry. Blast from the past there, Adam. So welcome, Adam. Excited to get in a couple of topics of how you view leadership in your life. So welcome.
Thanks, Dave. Looking forward to
it. So just getting right into it then, how would you define your leadership style?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a fairly approachable leader. I try to take that approach. And, you know, I think over time with more experience in it, I've been trying to become somewhat more rigid than I maybe, you know, was originally as a leader, just realizing sometimes the shortcomings of creating a really flat structure and, you know, creating, I guess, you know, the opportunity to do stuff without necessarily as much as you should have in the way of direction or consequences, which has been a good learning for me. So, you know, going the other way, I'm trying to balance being that approachable, balanced leader while adding some more regimen to the actual process, because I think that's where, you know, I see the need for me to improve personally.
Yeah, it's really insightful, right? Like do you think your leadership style has evolved over the last little bit? Like for the last 5 years at Savills, have you changed those kind of things that you're doing in a leadership perspective?
Absolutely. I think really went out of the way to create a new culture here, different from what you traditionally saw in brokerage, and try to make it really open and give people the opportunity to do stuff. But you start to understand when you work with people long enough, and not specific people, just broadly, when you're not tying compensation to some of the softer motivations, you really have to do it through the team mentality if you want to have stuff done. And it's easy when you work with a group of producers to get tasks done that really direct towards production. It's tougher when it's the long, more nebulous type of task that you need to focus on. And I've found in my, the 5 years of being a leader here, learning along the way what I need to do to get people directed at the right goal when it's something that they maybe don't see short-term payout. And, I have found that a lot of that is just, as a leader, taking on a stronger opinion, sometimes silencing some, taking in fewer voices versus silencing voices, just to make quicker, more agile decisions and not farm out decisions so much.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like you mentioned the traditional aspects of brokerage. So what did you not like about that traditional aspect that you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, brokerage historically has been a very rah-rah sales culture, and you get some interesting personalities and some behavior that would probably be considered offside in most other industries. So, you try to come in and create a culture where people aren't aggressive with each other in the office, and people are friendly and helping them all towards a common goal versus individualistic goals. And when you're trying to build that in a firm, and that hasn't, I would argue, really been done in this market, takes a lot of work to try to do something and build something different and be a different type of leader than what people would have been used to seeing in the past.
Yeah, exactly. So do you think your leadership style is successful or not? Or what would you improve? Like a half of leadership is a little bit of self-reflection, right?
Yeah. I think, it comes back to the comments of trying to be a little more rigid and directed. I think I made the mistake of being too flexible, trying to go the other way from traditional brokerage and let people have a lot of leeway in making decisions and being a part of, what happens in the office and going off on their own projects. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have a clear enough direction, it's tough to steer the ship that way. And I think that was something I've learned through this process is you can't just let, I think at business school, we're taught to have this flat organization, and it's great if everyone gets to make decisions and they'll feel so much autonomy that they'll love it. Well, when you're already in a world where you have a lot of autonomy, sometimes it's the direction part that's missing. And I think that was something that, I've learned over the last few years, that you kind of have to look at it a different way. And it's not necessarily what you were taught in school. It is a little more complicated when you're dealing with sales individuals and people who already have autonomy and self-motivation. If you want, common goals achieved, and if you want to create a culture that is not aggressive and people, demeaning colleagues and everything else that has traditionally come with brokerage, you've got to somehow balance being positive and open and very calm, while also, at times making the tough decisions.
So like lots of different types of people that you'd work with, you're terming them producers and salespeople, right? Like, do you have any examples of a time when you had to like pivot your leadership style with a particular project or employee and kind of just pivot your approach to make that team or employee or project successful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, a good one is, so much of what we do is focused on the producers and the salespeople, but we have a team of salaried staff too that have their own set of objectives and need different type of leadership, and had been really about giving autonomy to all parties. And noticed that on the administrative side of things, we weren't accomplishing what we needed to be able to track budget, do small tasks around the office. And I had to change my leadership style to be more directive of what needed to get done, and put my foot down a little bit more as far as how we were going to go about completing tasks and building in processes, and bringing in appropriate personnel from other offices too to help really build out the process, so it wasn't just do what you think is right here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the reason I like that question so much is kind of along my leadership journey, I found out like a bit more of how it's appropriate to pair certain leadership methods with different skill sets for your employees, like being more directive or more coaching or taking more of a partnership or delegating tasks specifically. So happy to send over some details on that if you need a little bit of
Yeah, that
bedtime
sounds
reading.
great. And I agree. I do think, like we have some young junior brokers, you want to take a very coaching like mentality, and you see that they have a lot of energy and excitement, and you're trying to direct them towards the positive things that you've done in your career on that side of things. But then when you're now dealing with someone else who might be in a research function or an administrative function, you somewhat step away from the coaching side of things, and it's a little more directive about what needs to get done and providing structure to the actual tasks we need to achieve as an office and why we need to achieve them. And those people are compensated differently, so you need to motivate them differently.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So would you say, kind of along that same lines, but would you have a different leadership style for internal versus external colleagues, like employees or clients and vendors?
Yeah, it is different. I mean, my goal is just try to be balanced and fair with everyone, internally or externally, so that part definitely doesn't change. But I think externally, yeah, I don't know if it's the leadership style of things, but when you're working on a project, it's just the level of promptness and presence. You want to do that with everyone, but it is just that extra bit important externally, and for better or for worse, people internally give you a little more leeway and understand, whereas externally you have to be able to always be especially present, especially when you're building business and and trying to execute on client files. I'm sure there's a better answer to and how this all comes together, but I can't think of it off the top of my head right now.
That's okay. I'm sure I can provide you some reading materials, as I mentioned before. So, have you had a situation where you kind of wanted to move forward with one of your ideas, but no one else on the team was bought in yet? And how did you get that buy-in, and what was the outcome? Let's say you had a situation where people in Toronto didn't necessarily agree with where you were headed, with one of your ideas. How did you address that specifically? And then what was the outcome there?
Yeah, I think that is I have had outcomes where we've had some differing opinions in terms of what we've been doing office to office. And myself as a more junior leader in the company, sometimes seniority can come in not from a title perspective, but just from a time in industry. So I've found success in being very fact-based, and laying out where I'm coming from, very specifically, and explaining what's happened in the past and why I feel this way, and providing examples and concrete situations of why I think we should move forward, but also from an evidence perspective, what has been done. A lot of times in sales, that stuff can seem pretty opinion based versus fact based. So that's why I think you have to work extra hard to really dig into quantitative measures when you can, to show why something's been a certain way and help convince people that way. I think in office too, you see a lot more of that when you're new to a role, but over time, if you do a good job building your reputation, I know that, my reputation is to be very detail oriented and, not missing much. It's meant that now when I'm, when someone might not agree on the ideas, they're going to look into, the specifics of why I thought that. And they know that I'm, I probably have a pretty serious reason for thinking that, and we'll show examples. And I'm also happy to come off it. So if you miss sometimes, you have that trust from people. And I think that's what allows you to continue to move forward, and I think in the situation, the Toronto example, you run into some different personalities that have different opinions, but I was able to show my track record and experience and why it made sense for me to be making these decisions and have the opinion I have, and was supported by much more senior members of leadership, that ultimately, allow you to continue down the path you've chosen.
Yeah, exactly right. Like, man, it sounds like you're in the course with us right now because we talk a lot about evidence-based leadership and how, especially for junior leaders like myself or in your situation, like it's so important to be based and rooted in fact and use that as a leverage point because that's really what makes effective managers. Like that's what is a difference maker within a lot of different industries. Having those sorts of detail and evidence-based opinions instead of relying on status quo. We're doing this because we've always done it this way, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And like, I'm not someone who particularly likes convention, and I understand why convention's there. But a great way to change things up is to have evidence and to have the receipts on why you think things should change. And you get to
Yeah,
do
it's
a
like
lot of cool things when you're willing to bring in new ideas and show why they might work.
exactly. It's like poison heuristics. You don't know what's true sometimes, and until you really get some evidence, what can you do? Sure. I mean, the next question is what we're going to wrap up with, right? Like a little bit more around ethics and being a leader. Like, what does ethical leadership mean to you, and how important it is to how you operate on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, that I think is fundamental to it. We talked about trying to build this different culture. If you're not being ethical in your leadership, you're not building a different kind of culture in brokerage. And that means treating everyone fairly. It's being open and honest. It's trying to reduce office gossip. It's trying to be a fair and clear communicator with everyone on your team, regardless of seniority. And the more you can do that ethically, I think the better it is for sending a message to the market, but also for recruitment and retainment. I do think that's pretty important.
Yeah, how is retainment in your business right now? Would you view that as a kind of a measure of success?
Yeah, and it's been good for us. I think we only one employee has left on their own volition, and that was a real consequence on the producer side for us. And I wouldn't attribute their leaving to items within our own office, and we maintain a very good relationship. So I think retainment's been great for us, at this stage of the business here. And that's not always easy because our industry has traditionally had terrible retainment. So I'm proud of what we've been able to do there and build for a team. So I am happy on that.
So that kind of wrapped it up for me. So I can't thank you enough for providing your insight on leadership today. So thanks so much for joining me for the chat. You're a father of two on top of everything you do. So thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Dave.
Name's Corrie DiManno, Mayor of Banff, and I've been the mayor since October 2021. So coming up on 3 years, I've got a year in the term left. This is my third term on Banff Town Council, though.
In your experience, what are some of the unique strengths of the teams that you've been working with in the town of Banff? I know you work with multiple teams through both the municipality, the province, the city, or the country, and various other groups and stakeholders like Lyricon. How do you capitalize on those strengths for better collaboration and decision making?
Level, like as an elected official, like I'm not an engineer, I'm not a planner, I'm not an evacuation expert, So having these experts around you giving you their best advice before you make a decision is just completely invaluable. And to have a really good working relationship with administration is also paramount. Like you see some municipalities that just fly in the face of a lot of expert opinion, and to me I'm just like, whoa.
It doesn't always work out well when that's the case.
Totally. And that's not to say, we always necessarily agree, but, I like it when we're making good decisions, not just political decisions.
So what advice would you give to aspiring leaders on managing diverse teams, especially from a public sector perspective?
I think what has helped me manage dynamic personalities is kind of having a groundwork or a framework of how we're going to go into things. So, just council meetings, for example, we have a procedures bylaw. And so when, a dynamic personality, whether it's a member of the public or a counselor, I've got a framework to work with to be like, you're out of bounds, and then they may make it personal that I'm trying to shut them down. And then I'm able to say, no, look, that's the procedures bylaw that we all agreed on. this isn't my bylaw, you know. And so I think just having a common understanding of the rules in which you're going to debate and you're going to engage is really, really helpful in my position.
What is something about leadership that you wish you knew before you became the mayor?
Ooh, is kind of going back to one of your prior questions. I didn't know like how much managing of dynamic or challenging personalities I'd have to do. As the mayor, when I was a counselor, I flew pretty low maintenance across the board. And then I became the mayor and I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know you could be a difficult counselor behind the scenes. Like, I didn't know that was an option because that's not what I did. And so then you spend a lot of your time, having to manage other personalities. And that ends up being a big part of the job that I didn't realize came with it.
Hey, ChatGPT, how are you today?
Hey there, I'm doing well, thanks. How about you? What's up?
I'm doing well, thank you. I just thought I would ask if I could interview you for a leadership podcast.
I'd be honored to be part of your podcast. What kind of leadership topics are you looking to cover? Maybe we can dive into something interesting together.
Yeah, that'd be really, really interesting. So, out of curiosity, how do you know if a manager's leadership style is successful or not?
That's a great question. A manager's leadership style is often deemed successful by looking at a few key indicators. Firstly, the overall performance and productivity of the team are good indicators. If goals are being met or exceeded, that's a positive sign. Secondly, employee satisfaction and engagement are crucial. Happy, motivated team members usually reflect effective leadership. Thirdly, the ability to navigate challenges and adapt to change shows strong leadership. How a leader handles crises or unexpected obstacles can be very telling. And finally, the development of team members is key. If a leader is mentoring and helping their team grow, it's a strong indicator of effective leadership.
Well, thank you very much. Do female leaders need to modify their leadership styles with their teams or other leaders if they're male?
That's an insightful question. Female leaders often face unique challenges, including gender biases and stereotypes, which can influence how they're perceived in leadership roles. Because of this, some female leaders may feel the need to adapt their styles depending on their audience or context. For instance, in male-dominated environments, they might adopt a more assertive approach to ensure their voices are heard. Conversely, in more diverse settings, they might emphasize collaborative and empathetic aspects of their leadership. However, the most successful leaders, regardless of gender, are those who are authentic and adaptable, finding a balance that allows them to be true to themselves while also effectively leading their teams.
As a leader, how do you get buy-in for your team or from your team?
Getting buy-in from your team is all about building trust, communicating effectively, and aligning on shared goals. Here are a few key strategies. Clear communication. Explain the why behind the vision or change. When people understand the reasons and benefits, they're more likely to support it. 2. Involve the team. Encourage input and feedback. When team members feel they have a stake in the process, they're more committed to the outcome. 3. Lead by example. Demonstrate commitment and enthusiasm. Your attitude can be contagious. 4. Empower others. Give team members ownership of tasks and decisions. This builds investment in the project's success. 5. Recognize and celebrate. Acknowledge contributions and celebrate milestones. This boosts morale and reinforces the value of everyone's efforts.
How important is ethical leadership in an organization?
Ethical leadership is crucial in any organization. It sets the tone for the entire company, influencing the culture, decision-making, and reputation. Here's why it's so important. 1. Builds trust. Employees and stakeholders are more likely to trust and respect leaders who act ethically, which fosters a positive work environment. 2. Enhances reputation. Companies known for ethical practices attract customers, clients, and partners who value integrity. 3. Encourages accountability. Ethical leaders hold themselves and others accountable, promoting a culture of transparency and responsibility. 4. Reduces risk. Ethical behavior helps avoid legal issues and scandals that can harm the organization. 5. Inspires loyalty. Employees are more loyal and engaged when they feel they work for an organization that aligns with their values. In short, ethical leadership is fundamental to long-term success and sustainability.
Well, thank you very much for being on the Leaders Unplugged podcast.
It was my pleasure to be part of the Leaders Unplugged podcast. Thanks for having me.
Join us next time for more on Leaders Unplugged. Thanks for listening.